Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite techniques for fishing in the wintertime, no matter where I'm at in the country, but especially up here in the Northeast when that water's cold. That's going to be jerkbait fishing. It's something I'm still working to get better at, but it's something that I've practiced over the past 2 or 3 years to improve my jerkbait fishing. I've learned a lot of tips over the years on a winter jerkbait fishing setup, from the rod, the reel, the line, the bait itself, even some modifications to catch more fish. So today we're going to break all of that down in today's video, make sure you have the right setup while you're out there fishing so you can catch more fish on a jerkbait too. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. All right, so to kick it off, we're going to talk about the rod, the reel, and the line setup. It's very important with fishing a jerkbait. It's one of those rods that you kind of need a little bit of specialty gear to use. It's not too specialty in the sense of like a giant glide bait rod where you're only going to use it for a giant glide bait. I use this same exact setup for my finesse swim baits. I use it for flukes. I use it for small crankbaits. I've even used it for like Senkos and stuff like that. So it can do a lot of things, but it's not a rod that most people just readily have available. Like a 7-foot medium heavy, I have that thing all the time on me. A spinning rod, 7-foot medium, I have that on all the time. This one was one that when I first started fishing, was one that took me a little bit longer to acquire, but it's a very key setup up here in the Northeast if you're fishing jerkbaits, smallmouth, stuff like that. That is going to be, this one specifically is going to be the Cash and Icon. You don't have to have this exact rod. I'm just going to mention all the gear that I use. I'll have it linked down below if you want to purchase any of it. It'll be all laid out down in the description. The Cash and Icon is what I use. This is the 6'9", extra fast, medium power. The two biggest things: the 6'9" length. I am kind of tall, I'm like 5'10". If you're a little bit taller than me, you might go with the 7 foot. So this rod comes in 2 models, the 6'9" and then a 7 foot, the exact same specs. If you're a little bit taller, you could go with the 7 foot. I like the 6'9" because I can twitch a jerkbait without slapping the water and doing stuff like that. And it's a very light rod. I mean, this thing compared to any other rod is extremely light in your hands, which is nice because when you're twitching that jerkbait, soft little twitches are all it takes. So if you have a heavy rod, you're just using your wrist muscles. So if it weighs a lot, you get fatigued really fast. But if this doesn't weigh a lot, then you're better off. And then the extra fast tip, that soft little twitch, that's what gets you that dart with that fast tip. If you have a moderate fast rod, you have to snap harder to pull all the slack out of the rod to get your bait to move properly. So that extra fast is really important to get your bait to dart on the smallest little twitch of your rod. And overall just allows you to fish a jerkbait longer throughout the day because you're not fatiguing yourself with working the bait too hard or holding too heavy of a rod. That's the biggest thing with a jerkbait. That's the only thing that's really important with this rod. The medium action or medium power is nice as well because it has enough give that when you hook a fish, these little baby treble hooks aren't going to pull out of its face because you don't have that moderate action when you would use for like a crankbait or something. So the hooks can pull a little bit easier. But if you have that medium power, I mean, this rod bends a lot. So I can get it to bend all the way down here and keep those fish hooked all the way back to the boat. Now, when it comes to the reel, I have an SLX DC on here. You don't need a DC reel. You don't even need the SLX. You can use whatever reel you like. The biggest key is that it has a 7 gear ratio. I used to fish a 6 gear ratio on my jerkbaits, and again, it's all in your fatigue throughout the day. So if you fish a 6, you're gonna have to reel a little bit extra to pick up the slack before you can twitch your bait again. Because when you're fishing a jerkbait, you're just using the reel to hold the line and pick up the slack, and then you're actually going to work the bait with your rod. You're never gonna reel and use the rod at the same time. So the less turns that it takes of the reel handle to get the slack off the water, the less times you gotta turn that reel handle to keep working your bait. Overall adds up throughout the course of a day, a long day of jerkbait fishing. So the 7 gear ratio is very, very important. You could even put an 8 on here if you wanted to. I just like the 7 because it keeps it more versatile for other techniques. But if you wanted to put an 8 on here, you could. All you need to do is reel up your slack, and then that's it. You're gonna reel up your slack and then twitch your bait. That's it. And then I spool mine up with straight 12-pound test fluorocarbon 95% of the time. That's what I'm gonna like to use. That's gonna give you almost maximum depth with your jerkbait. it's going to be thin enough to give it the right action, and it's going to get it to suspend in the water with that fluorocarbon. If you have very, very cold water like you will in the wintertime, you can go down to 10-pound test. It's going to be a little bit thinner, and it's going to get it to suspend a little bit easier down there in the water because you're not going to have the resistance of the line pulling the bait back up. There's a couple modifications we're going to talk about later in today's video that will combat that, because the reason I don't like to fish 10-pound test is it breaks much easier. If you get a little bit of a fray at all, it can break pretty easy. The difference between 10 and 12-pound test doesn't seem like a lot, but I've fished both. You will break off a lot more with 10-pound test, just even though it's 2 pounds lighter. So I like the 12 if I can get away with it. I'd rather modify my jerkbait, but if you like the lighter line, you're willing to play the fish more, everything like that, you can go with 10-pound test for your winter jerkbait setup as well. That will work just fine. When it comes to the bait itself, we have a couple options here. We're gonna grab these guys off the table back here too. There's a few options when I'm choosing my jerkbait on what I'm actually going to fish. So the first thing, don't use for winter fishing a 2-hook jerkbait. X-wraps, pointers, stuff like that, not a fan this time of year. And what those baits do, because they're shorter, fatter, more bulky, and have the 2 hooks, they're going to snap more in like big darting motions and do kind of crazy activities. That's not what the baits are doing this time of year. What those baits do is they kind of swim in the water and just dart a little bit to the side, and then they'll swim a little bit and dart a little bit to the side. That's those bait fish like dying off, and that's what you're trying to mimic with your jerkbait. So I don't want a jerkbait that's gonna have crazy action. So I'm gonna pick jerkbaits with a 3-hook design, because those, the way they're designed, they have just more of a longer tapered profile. They glide a little bit better. That's really what I like to use. My choice is going to be the 6th Sense jerkbaits. I'll basically choose this size depending on where I'm fishing, what type of fish I'm fishing for. If I'm fishing for smallmouth or spotted bass, this smaller size could be killer, especially if the bait is small, or you need a finesse presentation to really get those fish drawn in and eating your bait. I've caught tons of fish on this 106, no problem. Smallmouth including, works excellent. If you like other jerkbaits, you could pick a megabass, you could pick a shadow wrap. There's all kinds of 3-hook design jerkbaits out there. Pick your favorite, it'll work just fine. If you want to support the channel, you can purchase any of the 6th Sense ones down below. You can use my code Quince. You'll save 10% off your order, so you'll save some money on these jerkbaits, and you'll be able to help me continue making videos for you guys. It helps the channel out a ton, but use your favorite 3-hook jerkbait. That's just the biggest thing, is 3-hook over 2-hook. Then you're going to pick your depth. So these both come in a deep diving version and a shallow diving version. For me, my winter jerkbait fishing 9 times out of 10 is going to be smallmouth. So if I'm fishing for smallmouth, more often than not, those fish are going to be a little bit deeper. They're going to be in clearer water. They're going to come a little bit longer to get that bait from a longer way away. And I'm usually fishing like steeper bluff banks, deep points, stuff like that. I'm going to want that deeper bait. Up on Lake Erie, those fish could be in 8 to 12 foot of water. I want a jerkbait that's going to get down 7-8 feet deep and only have to draw them up a couple feet. If you like fishing for largemouth, this one might be a better choice for you, the shallow version. I've fished this one for largemouth up here in the Northeast a lot. I'll fish it in ponds, or I'll fish it in grassy lakes that have grass that grows within 3 or 4 foot of the surface, and I'll fish this bait down 3 or 4 foot right over the top of that grass and try and get those largemouth to come out and get it. Where if you use this bait, it would get hung up in that grass and it would never get a natural action. So choose that accordingly based on what you're fishing for, where you're fishing. That will help you out a ton. And then 2 more things to cover off here is your color and then your modification. So the colors that I'm going to go with really depend on the water conditions. So if I have overcast skies, dirty water, just overall I need some flash to get those fish to come bite that, or I want my bait to stand out a little bit, I'm gonna go with something white or with some flash. This has both of it in it. It has some scale pattern on the top and it's got white sides. That's a great one to draw them in from a distance. If I'm fishing in some very clear water, some sunny conditions, not a lot of wind out there, I need a natural looking bait, I'm gonna go with some type of a ghost pattern like this. or something very natural like that 97. It's that just like a plain bone matte white color on the side, really just looks like a bait fish, but doesn't have all this flash and vibrancy on the side. And then my last color is going to be this guy right here. If I'm smallmouth fishing, it's called Wabi Sabi, has a chartreuse belly on the bottom. It'll draw those smallmouth from a long way away. A lot of those clear water lakes that I fish, you might think this is crazy to throw something like this, but I'm drawing fish up out of 20 foot of water to come get this bait 8 foot underneath the surface, just because they can see that belly from a long way away and it draws them in. So that's a great choice as well. The last thing you'll notice, these jerkbaits, they come with just plain hooks on them, which is great. I've done a video on this. I'll link it right at the end of this to show you how to do this exact setup. I could not find my lead wire, but what we're going to talk about is putting lead wire on your hooks. What I'll do is I'll pull my bait down in the water, and colder water is more dense. So a lot of times this will float, where in 55-degree water it might suspend. In 45-degree water, it might slowly float, and you do not want this thing floating whatsoever. You want it to stay either suspend or slow sink, staying in the fish's face. So I will pull it down in the water and see what happens. If it starts to float up a little bit, I'll take my bait out of the water. I've done split rings in the past. I've changed hooks. I like to fish the hooks that come on these baits because it gives them the best action. So I'll take lead wire, and as you can see on this bait right here, I just wrap it around the front of the hook like a spring. I'll put a couple wraps on, I'll pull it back in the water, and I'll see if it floats, suspends, or sinks, and add or take off lead as needed. You don't change your split rings on your bait. You're not changing your hooks on your bait for performance in the long run. And then if the water warms up and your bait starts to sink too much, you can just peel this lead off and your bait is back to the original way that it's meant to be fished. So that's why I like doing the lead wraps. It's the best modification to get your bait to sit in front of those fish's face. And it's super important to catch a lot of fish in the winter. I will always carry a little spool of lead wire. I'll link it down below so you guys can get some. And that's what I'll have on me when I'm winter jerkbait fishing. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Check this video out right here where I talk more about wintertime jerkbait fishing, showing you how to do that lead wrap. Hit that subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching.